nice with the ice so smooth. If you messin' me, you messin' with the goons. Pucks in deep 5-hole, then we celly. Hockey with the boys and we trip like Letter Kenny. With dollar bills, we got the loonies. Paul and Braydon, a couple beauties. Gloves coming off if you want to tangle, or I can hit you with the dirty dangles. Yeah, this is Dirty Dangles.
Ooh, what is going on there, Dirty Danglers? Welcome to another episode, Stanley Cup Final Recap. Here to break it down, as always, Paul and Braydon, Game 7. And close to my prediction, at least. You know, I did have St. Louis going all the way to the Cup Final, and what you know they got there. I did also predict Game 7 overtime, and we didn't see that. But we saw, nonetheless, very entertaining game.
Yeah, absolutely. It was... for the Game 7 at least, St. Louis wise anyways, it was a good game for them. But honestly, in my opinion, Boston should have won the cup. Their top guys just didn't step up.
Oh, we're just going to get to that right now?
We might as well. Just jump into it.
But here's the thing is, you have a best of 7 series for that reason. You know, you could have a best of 5 and you could say maybe the best team didn't win because it's only in 5 games. But this is a 7-game series, Brian. Like, I think the team that wins the best of 7 is probably the better team.
I don't know. If you just look at it, in my opinion, Binnington was the only reason why St. Louis Blues won the Stanley Cup. I don't know. If it wasn't for him, if you watched the Game 7, the first period, Boston dominated. And if it wasn't for Binnington, it would have been 3-0 by the end of the first. I don't know. It's just in my opinion that Boston was the better team. They had control early on. It's just when you got a guy like Binnington and Ned, they can steal the momentum right away. I don't know. You
know what? The same can definitely be said about Tuukka Rask, though. Tuukka Rask played amazing. I believe he had an unreal goals against average save percentage, well above .910, and he played lights out. And you got to hand it to St. Louis, though, because they really worked at it. And, you know, as we saw in Game 7, they scored some nice goals on them.
Absolutely.
And like that first goal by Ryan O'Reilly, like that tip was perfect. And only a tip shot like that is going to get you a first goal in a Game 7 Stanley Cup Final.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to discredit what St. Louis did because they had a phenomenal playoff run. Even just from the start of the January, right? Like, things just went their way. And I'm not going to discredit that because their defense was amazing. Like, that defensive core is so good. And just how they played as a team and having the leaders on their team, like guys like O'Reilly and like even Alexander Steen, who was playing on the fourth line, who's been with that team for, I think it's been 11 years now. And to get to this point, it's awesome what they were able to overcome, especially at the deficit that they were at the start of the calendar year.
Yeah, you know what? And of course, we're going to talk about this a lot. The Conn Smythe Trophy going to Ryan O'Reilly. He played unreal, and what a trade that was. All right, so he was traded, for those who don't know, from Buffalo to St. Louis because he kind of lost his love for hockey, and obviously he's in Buffalo, and you know any sane person would be depressed in Buffalo. Yeah. And so he got traded out, and he put up a career year. And he was the only Blue going when they were in 31st place. And we're probably going to talk about that too. Never happened in the NHL history. But yeah, what a great player. Very deserving of the Conn Smythe. And you know what? He had 23 points in 26 games. And he was the top centerman. And he led this team to a Stanley Cup in part.
Okay. I hope people who listen to this podcast aren't gonna look at me a different way. It's just in my opinion that Ryan O'Reilly shouldn't have won the Conn Smythe. I think it should have been Jordan Binnington. I'm not trying to discredit what O'Reilly did.
All right. Well, just make your claim for Binnington, and I'll make my claim for O'Reilly.
Okay, fair enough. If you look over the course, because the Conn Smythe is not just for the Stanley Cup Finals, right? It's for the whole playoffs. So if you look at how the playoffs turned out, Binnington is the reason why they made it to where they are now. If you look at the Winnipeg series, Binnington stood on his head. Like that even went to 7 games, or did it go 6 games? I can't remember really. It was just, he was just stellar throughout the whole playoffs. Yeah, he did get rattled from time to time, but he has been the most consistent player for St. Louis, and just he was able to stand on his head. The incredible plays that this guy can make at such a young age, and how he was able to develop and grow in the short period of time, like in 6 months he's been in the league, and just how he was able to stand on his head. And it's just been incredible to watch. Not trying to take away anything from O'Reilly, because he had a hell of a playoffs. It's just, in my opinion, that if it wasn't for Binnington, that things would have turned out differently.
If Binnington would have won the Conn Smythe, I don't know, but he might have been one of the first goalies to win that with a 2.46 goals against average in the playoffs. Definitely nothing against Binnington. He's a great goalie, and that team played very good team defense. And Binnington was good, but I definitely think if you look at past goalie Conn Smythe winners such as J.S. Jaguar,
Tim Thomas.
Yeah,
hate to say it.
I know, but honestly, like they played lights out, and there's no question that they were the Conn Smythe winners. And that is that's usually the case with the goalie, is if you win the Conn Smythe, you have to win it, no questions. But because you're always in the limelight, you're the goalie. So goalies are usually always the favorite to win a Conn Smythe. So if it ever is up for decision, and honestly, Ryan O'Reilly, a lot of people didn't think St. Louis could beat Tuukka Rask. Heck, when we were watching that first 10 minutes, I don't think we saw St. Louis winning. I don't think we saw them coming up with that lead after 10. But here's the thing, is Ryan O'Reilly had that goal that set them off. And he's done that in the past. He's had a game-winning goal. He's played unreal.
I get it, but
deserving Conn Smythe winner.
But to go on what Tim Thomas did against the Canucks in 2011, right? I'm just saying that series went to 7 games as well. So, and he won the Conn Smythe. So I'm just kind of curious, because that doesn't make much sense of why Binnington couldn't have won that.
Tim Thomas. Okay, if we're going to go back to 2011, if you're going to be like every other analyst that wants to shove it up me with
I hate being that
2011.
guy. I hate being that guy,
but
sure.
Listen, if we go back to that, Tim Thomas didn't really give up too many goals in any which one of those games.
Fair.
He's had bad plays perhaps, but he's never had maybe bad games where he's been pulled. We've seen that from Binnington.
Yep, that's true. That's true. I do get your points. I just feel like Binnington kind of got snubbed in a way. It's just how he played. I'm not discrediting O'Reilly, but for you guys listening, let us know on social media, on Twitter or on Instagram. We would like to hear if who you guys had picked as the Conn Smythe winner.
Yeah, and as we continue to break down the NHL playoffs and what was and who are the champions, what do you think? Having St. Louis and Boston in the final, 2 heavy hockey teams, ultimately the better heavy hockey team winning, what do you think that means for the game going forward? The way teams might look at draft picks, do you think it changes from this push to a more speed and skill movement?
Yeah, absolutely. I just feel like, again, going with the Canucks, right? We're you were telling me before, I think you were saying that St. Louis is going, or teams might try to emulate St. Louis's decor because of how tall they are, because none of their D-men were under 6 feet tall. But if you took a team like Vancouver, for example, they took Quinn Hughes in the draft, shortest defenseman in the draft, right? So I think teams are starting to look at, okay, well, the bigger defensemen or bigger players aren't necessarily valuable as they were in the past. So I think teams are starting to go towards, okay, this guy can beat this guy off the rush. Great, he's skillful. He may be small, but we can turn him into something even better, right? So I think it's going into that high skill, high speed, just high hockey IQ kind of hockey. And you can see that with a player like McDavid, right? I think teams are trying to get to that kind of, not necessarily the caliber of McDavid, right? Just just that kind of player. I feel like that's what the way hockey's going to go. But seeing how St. Louis was able to win the cup with the big guys that they did have, yeah, there may be, but I don't necessarily think they're going to try to emulate that kind of play style or those players.
Yeah, and what I think is going to happen is teams are still going to want, like you said, those Quinn Hugheses, those D-men that are a little shorter but really play a critical role on, say, the power play or, moving the puck up the ice. The thing is, though, is how you round out your D-core and who you choose to play role positions on your team, such as 6 defensemen, a solid shutdown top 4 to play with a guy such as, Quinn Hughes, Torrey Krug, whoever. Mm-hmm. I think that's going to change, and teams are going to start looking for some size and a guy that can skate very well and can defend very well.
Well, like a guy that you really like, and we always talk about, is Joel Edmondson. And I feel like you could get Joel Edmondson for relatively cheap, because I don't think that St. Louis necessarily covets Edmondson like other teams would. Like, you keep saying that he's a top 4 defenseman on any other team, and I completely see that. His defensive skills are really good. Like, but the thing is, like, he was a healthy scratch for a few games with St. Louis in the playoffs, and I don't know. Like, I do get it that teams would love to have that player, like Eric Goodbranson with Pittsburgh, right? That's kind of the guy. It gives you a backbone for a team, and it gives you that intimidation, right? So I can definitely see that.
Yeah, and I definitely couldn't agree more. I think it's all about rounding out a solid D-core and a D-core that can stay healthy. And obviously the playoffs just ended, so we don't know who on St. Louis was actually injured, playing injured, whatnot. But all the D-men were available for Game 7, and all that were touted to play on defense did play defense. So that is something to be said there, is having a team that is healthy and D-men that stay relatively healthy.
Yeah, fair enough. Let's go to Boston for a second and how they played. In what I saw in Game 7, I was very disappointed. And the person I was very disappointed in seeing is Brad Marchand.
Okay, but was that just because of that one play where he went for a bad line change on, what was it, the second or third goal?
No, it was, well, yeah, I'm not including that, because that's just a bad mistake that any hockey player could have made, right? What I'm saying is Brad Marchand would have been and should have been the key for the Boston Bruins winning in Game 7. I thought this guy would have gone underneath people's skin, would have went over to Binnington and just try to rattle him in some way, just get in his face. For me, Marchand was completely non-existent in this game. I didn't see him at all. And I was just really let down by his play. And in my opinion, even Ryan O'Reilly, I feel like Ryan O'Reilly played Patrice Bergeron's game better than Patrice Bergeron. And again, that was another factor. Bergeron, he was great, but he could have been a little bit better. And Pasternak just couldn't get anything going as well.
Yeah, and part of the reason could be injuries, and we talked about this on the last podcast. I thought Boston's top line was a little bit banged up, and obviously Game 7, there's no excuses because everybody's banged up, but ultimately St. Louis just played better hockey. They had defense supporting the rush, and when they dropped it back to them, it always seemed like St. Louis had options. And early in the first period, I noticed that St. Louis couldn't really get anything going, couldn't get any passes through, because their game is basically going from behind the net down low out front to either slot. And that's kind of how they play. And Boston was on top of their game, and then they kind of let loose a little bit and got off their checks, and that's when St. Louis took over.
Well, yeah, and I give Boston all the credit in the first period. They didn't. It took 15 minutes, over 15 minutes, for St. Louis to register a shot in between shots, right? So give Boston a ton of credit for them, because they shut down St. Louis and they won that period. Even though the score didn't show that, they won that period. Boston played a hell of a playoffs. They did extremely well, and I don't know. I was a little bit let down. It's hard for me to say that because what happened in 2011, right? So you kind of want this to happen, but I feel like Boston overall was the better hockey team. It's just their star players in this game just didn't perform, in my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's definitely fair. I just loved St. Louis's team play, how they play their systems. I mean, there's a reason they've been the best team in hockey since January when they were in last place, the first NHL team ever to go from last place after Christmas to Stanley Cup champs.
Okay, let me throw something at you there, Paul. What is a bigger accomplishment? Is it Vegas last year as an expansion team making it to the Stanley Cup finals? Or is it St. Louis finishing dead last at the turn of the calendar year to winning the Stanley Cup this year?
I think that is definitely a tough one just because as an expansion team, you're already seen as like this huge underdog where you're starting with nothing. And that's the general perception, even though we both know they had a very decent team.
Mm-hmm.
Probably nothing more than decent. But of course, you got to look at also St. Louis, last place. I remember like some really key analysts were saying they just look so slow out there and that they had to make some big moves. Tarasenko, there was some trade talks with him as his no trade clause was going to kick in this July. His name was thrown around a little bit. And you know what? To answer your question, I've got to say Vegas still. Just because you're taking a team that's hasn't ever played together before and then just makes a run through the regular season and goes to the Stanley Cup final. So I would say that just for the sheer factor of team chemistry and how hard it is to do that in just 1 year.
That's fair. But obviously, I guess I'm going to have to go opposite of you. I personally think it's St. Louis. I just think with them being dead last right at the turn of the calendar year, having Jake Allen underperform greatly, having their coach fired, having a new coach hired, then bringing the rookie goalie up and performing like he did, then having the team just kind of build around. Like there was no, I don't think St. Louis made a trade at the deadline to help the team really. So I think just with everything that they did at the beginning of the year and how everything just molded together and they were able to like figure things out on the fly in such a short period of time, I feel like that kind of, I feel like that is a lot more impressive to me over Vegas, because Vegas, they were able to get all these great players from these other teams that couldn't protect them. So, I mean, I feel like they had a little bit more of an advantage. I think even with the chemistry that St. Louis already had, I don't know, I feel like it was more impressive for St. Louis. But anyways, with that being said, we'd like to thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of the podcast. Again, like I'll keep saying it, make sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Dirty Dangles HP. We'd love to get some questions from you and just make you guys a part of a segment and just be more engaging with you guys. It would be a lot of fun. Check us out on YouTube. Give us a like and a subscribe. Again, we'd love to hear from you. But with that being said, we really appreciate it. And until next time, Dirty
Dangles.